So this is a video on how Google Calendar works, some tips and tricks on how to optimize it for your usage. Let me start with sharing my screen and walking you through my setup by using a test account. I usually go to calendar.google.com and land on Google Calendar homepage. If you're setting this up for the first time, your layout may look different. There may be a few screens you're prompted to go through. If you're already in a Google app, you could always click on this waffle menu and go to Calendar. If you're on a phone, it's quite different, but right now, what we're going to be talking about is how to use Google Calendar through the web browser. Whenever I'm using a new software, I like to orient myself a little bit to find out what's on the screen. If you're an advanced user, or if you're very familiar with technology, or if you're very familiar with Google Calendar, you can probably skip forward and skip this section, but this part is intended for people who are generally a little bit overwhelmed with technology, and when they use a new software, they're a little bit overwhelmed with what the different options are. So the first thing I do is figure out the layout. So I'm here on this web page. I'm on calendar.google.com, and I see that there's something over here. When I hover my mouse over, I see that this looks like a menu. I notice that when I click on this, something happens, right? Some things get hidden, some things appear, some things get hidden. So I know that it has an interaction. When your mouse changes to a click icon, that means something is clickable, right? So I can see that if I hover over this, my mouse icon has changed, which means if I click on this, it's going to do something. That's the same case here. But as you notice, if I click here, nothing really happens. One of the first things that I do whenever I open up a new software that I'm not familiar with is just look at the four corners. That's typically how things are designed these days. There's usually a menu on the top left or a menu on the top right. I click on that, something happens. If I click on this menu, something happens. There's sometimes something on the bottom left or the bottom right. So take a look at the four corners and see what's there. That's the first way I would try to get familiar a new software. What are some of the things that we want to do in Google Calendar? So I've taken a look at the four corners. I see that there's a main menu here and showing me some dates. It's showing me other time zones. It's showing me some calendars here. Not really sure what any of that thing means. I see a create button here. I see a button for today. So I know that today is June 5th and I can see that here. I can see that there's a search bar. I can see that support, there's a settings menu, and there's a drop down here. Right when I see that arrow, I know that it's a drop down. I see something that's calendar and tasks. Maybe I don't know what tasks is. Maybe I'm feeling bold to switch to that and see what that does. And I go to a different program. It completely changed my screen. Okay, maybe I didn't want that. So I can either hit the back arrow, or in this case, I know that it's a tab that's like a switch between two sections. So I can also click here and come back to calendar, because that's what we're going to focus on. So something that might be obvious here, we're in calendar. Today is June 5th, and I want to add an entry. There's a line here. So this is 7 p.m. PST or almost 8 p.m. PST. So I can see that there's a line drawn here. So what is this showing me? This is showing me that this is the time right now. So what happens if I click here? Does it do anything? Okay, it looks like a little box pops up and asks me to type some information in here, or it gives me sort of a form to put some information here. So maybe I will do something here, Google Calendar training, and it gives me a few options here. So I can create this event. I'll get into all the different settings and what they mean, but let's start with just creating a basic calendar invite. So Google Calendar training, it's an event. I chose the time. It's saying 7:30. Actually, you know what? I want to start it at 7:45, and it changed it to 8:45 here because it's assuming that I still wanted an hour. So 7:45 to 8:45. I could add guests to it if I want. I can add a location. I can add a description. I can set the calendar I want it to be. And very simple thing to do would be to just save that. So I have now saved an event. I can come in here and I can click modify, and I can edit this event. It opens it up in a bigger view for me. And there's more settings here, right? So this is what is typically called like a quick add. So I can quickly add something to my calendar, or I can click on more options and go to the full menu, which allows me to really customize my calendar invite if I want to. Let's take a look at some of the advanced settings here. So I'm going to create another one for tomorrow. And instead of doing a quick add, I'm just going to go directly into more options, into the full setting. Let's call this like lunch with Tom, right? That's a calendar invite that I'm creating. And I get the option to customize pretty much everything I want about this calendar invite. So I can choose the date. I can choose maybe my lunch is actually at 2 p.m., little late lunch, and 2 to 3 p.m. And this is on June 6th. I could choose the time zone, but I'm not going to complicate that. Probably create a separate video for time zone, but just know that you can do separate start and end time if you'd like. This isn't an all-day invite. This is actually for a specific time. So again, I clicked here, unclicked it. This is not a repeatable invite. This is just a one-time lunch. It's not a recurring item on the calendar. But if you want to set it to repeated, you could do this. This is very common in any calendar or scheduling type software. Because this is a Google product, they have an option to make this a virtual meeting right away. So if I clicked on this, it would add some conferencing details, a Google Meet link right away into that calendar invite. But in this case, I'm meeting somebody in person for lunch, so I don't need that. I could look up a restaurant, and this would look it up in Google Maps directly. So I'm going to pick the fanciest restaurant I can think of. So I'm going to type McDonald's and find the closest McDonald's next to me. So I'm going to pick McDonald's in Vancouver, where I'm right now. So there's McDonald's, and that's where we're getting lunch. This is a notification that's going to be sent to me. I probably want to be notified about 60 minutes prior to my fancy lunch. And I can actually add more notifications. Maybe I also want email notification one day before the event. Maybe this calendar invites a few days out, and I want another way to remind myself. So there's a bunch of different options here to customize your notifications. You can do weeks, days, hours, minutes, right? Pretty much everything here is customizable. This is my default calendar, so I'm not going to change that. If this is a calendar that you're using, probably will show your name here and not any other calendar. But as we get more advanced in settings, we can talk about creating this on a separate calendar, right? Like this is a feature you would use if you are creating a calendar, right? Or you have a separate calendar for your family, if you have a separate calendar for work, if you have a separate calendar for soccer practice, like whatever it is, right? You're able to create separate calendars within one Google Calendar account. So we'll get to those features a little bit later. Do I want my calendar visibility to show free or busy? This is more applicable if you're in a workspace or this is a work calendar. I usually let it be default visibility and set it to busy, right? But there's sometimes when it's just a little reminder that pops up and I want people to be able to schedule time with me. And in those cases, maybe I will set it as free. The description, let's say I'm actually sending this invite to a friend of mine. Let's say this is Tom's email address. I can say, "Hi Tom, I am excited for our lunch. I will call you before I head out." Or I can provide some more instructions. I can provide some more reminders. If I had an agenda for a meeting, I could put that agenda here. Let's say I wanted this to be in bold and I wanted to add an attachment. I can do that kind of thing here as well. I was able to zoom out and see the rest of this. Guest permissions, right? What is the guest allowed to do? So if I invited Tom using this email address, can Tom invite other people? Yes. If I had this box checked, they can. Can my invitees see the guest list? Yes, no. Suppose I want to invite a bunch of people and I don't want them to see who else is being invited, I can uncheck this box. Can they modify the event? I want the other person to also have control over the calendar and be able to move things along, because maybe I don't want to own that invite all the time and I want people to be able to put information here, change the address, all of that. I would give the guest the permission to do that. So this is the permission for anyone else that I'm inviting. I have the option to mark someone as optional. So this notifies that person that they don't really need to attend. This is if you have a bunch of invitees for a particular meeting. This is probably in a work setting where not everyone needs to show up to that meeting, and you can probably set them as optional so they know that they're not required you want it to be clear that they're optional for the meeting, this is where you choose that setting. One tab that we haven't explored here is actually finding a time on someone's calendar, and this is usually only useful if this is somebody in your own organization or your workspace. If it's a shared workspace, so like someone else is in my company and I'm trying to see their calendar availability, I can use the Find a Time tab, which allows me to see whether they have an available slot. So that's the first part of this, is quick overview on creating a calendar invite and all the different options that are available in a calendar invite.